Good morning. Okay, good morning, everyone. There's a term that the Gemara uses called Zuto Shel Yam, which is a wave of the ocean. And what it really means is that if, let's say, I'm sitting on the beach and all of a sudden a huge wave comes and carries away all of the stuff that I'm sitting with on the beach. It takes away my watch and my jewelry and my wallet and all of these other things, and like in a tsunami, and it just washes everything away. So the Gemara describes that as an example of something that is not just lost. It takes a different category than just lost, because lost means that I don't know where it is, but at least it's retrievable and within the purview of other human beings. But this is an object that is completely outside of the purview of any human being. It's like it's totally inaccessible to anyone, at least for now. Is it possible that it'll eventually wash ashore? Yes, but because there comes a point where it is so lost that it's not just lost to me, but it's lost to all human beings. So then as a result, it occupies a different status in halacha, and there's no longer a mitzvah of hashavas aveda, because we assume that anything that's lost like that and considered irretrievable becomes everyone's property. Now, where would this apply? Let's say you're a sea diver and you find buried treasure of a shipwreck. You find not buried treasure. You find a shipwreck. Are you entitled to the riches that are on that ship? So according to this halacha, the answer is yes. Now, that doesn't take into account dina de malchusa dina. I know that there are some laws in different countries that if you find a treasure chest from a sunken ship off the coast within a certain number of miles from a country, the country, I think, can claim eminent domain or something like that, and can basically say that all shipwreck treasure belongs to the country, right? So we're not taking into account yet dina de malchusa dina, but I just wanted to point this out, that there are certain circumstances in halacha where something is so irretrievably lost to not only me, the owner, but to all human beings, that even if at some later point it's retrieved, like miraculously it washes ashore, then there's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda. And so he writes as follows, that this is something that we haven't seen in the Rab Shulchan Aruch yet. We probably will see it at some later point. He writes, Chayfetz sha'avad mi ba'ala ve'ein efsharut lahatzilo. If something was lost from the owner and it's impossible to retrieve, afilu im yesh bo simin zacha b'hamotze. So if by some fluke it is retrieved at some later date, then the finder is allowed to keep it, b'hitzaref hatanaim dilakaman, with the following conditions. In other words, you have to satisfy the following three conditions. Number one, ein efsharut liba'alim ola adam acher lahatzilat hachefetz. No one has the ability to save this object because it's completely out of the purview of all human beings. Uva'ofen zeh, af kisha'omed bal hachefetz v'tzavach she'eno mityaesh zacha hamotze. In this scenario, even if the owner of the object says, I don't have Yeyush, I'm gonna get this back no matter what, his declaration is totally null and void from a legal standpoint, because it's total. I mean, it's not a realistic declaration. If a tsunami comes and wipes away a coastline, and your stuff was on that coastline, it's not realistic. Number two, kishiyesh efsharus bedochak lahatzila tachefetz chayav lahachzir. He says, if it is possible to retrieve the object, but it will take effort, so then there is a mitzvah to return it. Rakim haba'olim hishtadu lahatzilo, but only if the owner is willing to put in that effort themselves. In other words, if the owner is willing to go deep sea scuba diving in order to retrieve his object, so then you don't have a right to preempt him and go scuba diving yourself before him, right? But if the owner basically says, I'm never getting this back, I'm not going to hire a deep sea diver to retrieve it, and you decide you would like to do it, so then you have a right to do so. And similarly, if you're not sure, then you have to consult with them first before you can feel legally entitled to take it for yourself. If the owner wasn't even present and may not even know, so then you also have an obligation to return it. And number three, if the law of the land is different, or if the Beis Din has intervened and said that you have to go and return it nonetheless, then you have to listen to the governing authority. So that even though this halacha of zuto shel yam is the classic case in the Gemara, but it can be overridden by the law of the land, like I mentioned, by the shipwreck treasure. Now, in Tes Vav he writes, Afal pisha in niskaimu hatanoim delael zocha motze bechefetz lifnim mishur sadin tov v'yashar lahachzir ba'ofen shenoda leba'olam mimitziyaso v'nasnu simanu. Now that's the letter of the law, but it's proper also to go beyond the letter of the law if the owner can provide a siman and really would love to get to retrieve the object that they lost because it got swept away by the ocean. If there is no siman, then they would have to bring proof identification that it's theirs. It also depends on the economic conditions of both the loser and the finder. If the loser is wealthy, for example, and the finder is poor, then many times even going beyond the letter of the law is not necessary. A diamond falls into the ocean. You know, you've heard these famous stories about the poor man who goes fishing on Shabbos, catches a fish, guts it, cuts it open, and finds a diamond, right? So that's clearly an example of a situation where you don't have to do Hashavas Aveda. There's no need to do Hashavas Aveda. It's almost like God has given you a gift, because he's taken something that clearly belonged to someone at some point, but it's like either it was a shipwreck or something like that happened, and God basically caused it to come to you. Okay. Isha Nesua. If a woman finds something that washed ashore and she wants to return it and go beyond the letter of the law, she has to consult with her husband. Unless it's a trifle that is of very little value. Okay, now he's going to give us examples now. In Tes Zayin, he's going to give us examples of these kinds of lost items. Matzino beposkin dugmaot ledinzeh. Some examples. Allah yamo nahar al gidotav v'gar imo chafatzim. So that's the example that I gave you, from the Gemara, where the ocean or the river overflows, or a huge, like a tsunami kind of wave, and it wipes out the coastline and takes all of the objects with it. Another example, matzah chayfetz b'karkayis hayam. If you're scuba diving and you find an object embedded on the bottom of the sea, Number 3, Ibed matbeya otabas b'chol hayam va'afilu roe hamotze shama abed mevi misnenet umisanenet hachol. A guy loses a coin or a ring, and he's on the beach, and he brings a sieve, and he starts pulling up sand to try to sift the sand to find it, and he totally can't find it. So then at that point, once he calls it a day and he goes home, if you by chance happen to find that ring, so then technically that was something that was lost from everybody because there was a whole search, no one could find it. And therefore, technically, according to the letter of the law, you'd be allowed to keep it. Number 4, Hama'abed Yahalom Katan Badesha Vafilu Biritzba Im Hama'abed Hevi Mitate V'chibed Hamakom V'lo Matzava Halachlo. Another example is if a person loses a diamond or a small pearl in a large field or any kind of ground surface, and they've done a whole search and no one's been able to find it, and then everyone gives up. So then that's also a classic situation of where the object was irretrievable, and it's considered to be more than just lost. It's considered to be totally out of the purview of human access. And then finally, hey, Tarnagolim Shabarchu Mibeito V'Efshar Lahachziram. If a bunch of chickens fly the coop, literally fly the coop, and they run out into the wilderness, that's also considered to be a situation where they're considered irretrievable, and they're considered to be hefker, because they don't want to. They go out into the wilderness and are not accessible to anybody during that interim, during that period of time. Okay, so these are examples now, but lifnim mishuras hadin, you should go beyond the letter of the law in many of these cases. Another example, Ra beis chaveru nisraf v'chiref nafsho v'yitzliach lahotzim mimenu chafatzim. So a person sees his friend's house burning down, and the guy basically curses and says, "I've lost my house," and he abandons it. So if you go in afterwards and you find and you do you want to do scavenging of the area, so then that would be permitted. And if you find something of value, technically you're allowed to keep it. 7, gayaso listim bo'u alav v'shadeduhu ve'eni yachol lahatzlim miyadam. If a person is attacked by armed robbers, as a victim of armed robbery, and there's nothing he can do to retrieve it, so then there's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda technically. And that's, of course, very problematic, because in today's world, you have a whole black market of stolen goods. You can't say that it's okay to purchase stolen goods. There's something certainly unethical about it, that there's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda on stolen goods. It's a little bit difficult to reconcile, but technically, there's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda. Is there lifnim mishuras hadin? Absolutely. Okay. And some say that if something was confiscated by a tax collector, that would have the same status, as that it's considered to be totally lost, and the guy's is considered to be irretrievable, and so therefore there's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda in all of those cases. All right. So again, I just want to clarify that technically there may not be a mitzvah of hashavas aveda, but in many of these instances, a person should go lifnim mishuras hadin, above the letter of the law, and be a good Samaritan. If you're able to retrieve stolen goods, you should try to get them back to the owner, and especially because Dina de Malchusa requires you to do that as well. Okay, this next section we did see together in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, which is Aveda Midas, that if a person wantonly abandons or acts irresponsibly with their property, so then I also don't have a mitzvah of hashavas aveda. Hazorek arnako b'rishus harabim. If a person takes a bag of his money bag and throws it into rishus harabim. O shenodalo ala avedaso shenimtzeis b'makom she'enu shamor ve'enu notla. Or a person is aware that he's left an object of value in a completely exposed public area, and he says, I don't care about it. Like, in other words, he doesn't go back to retrieve it. Or masa chayfetz la'adam hamuchsa kegazlan, or if a person allows his property to be, or gives over his property to a person who is a known thief, o lekatan she'eno bardas, or to a minor, okay, hiniach richbo b'tzura azuva lelo chalonot, or let's say a person abandons his vehicle with the windows open, and he said that's what lelo chalonot means, right? Or without windows. Din hachefetz kehefter kehefter v'chol hakodem zocha b'chefetz. So in all of these cases, if it's clear from the forensics that this is abandoned property, then it has the status of hefker, and you have a right to take it. There's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda in any of those cases. And like we saw in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, at least according to one opinion, not only that there's no mitzvah of hashavas aveda, but you have every right to take that property for yourself and just keep it. It's whether it's an abandoned car, or a person puts something in the front of their property that they need to dump out. There's no obligation whatsoever to deliberate as to whether you're allowed to take it or not. Okay. Now, amnam im hachefet shamur, ach efshar l'shamur shemira me'ula yoter. But let's say the object is somewhat protected. It may not be fully protected, but it's somewhat protected from the public access. Kagon. Here's an example. Hamashir eglat yiladim b'cheder hamadregot ve'ino machniso leveto. So a person leaves a baby carriage in the lobby of their apartment building. So that's not well protected. That's accessible to the public. It may be somewhat irresponsible, but it's not totally irresponsible. Ohinia chomrei biniya birachov lelo shmira. Or let's say a person leaves building materials. It's on a construction site, and there's a pile of new bricks waiting to be added to the new structure. So that's not abandoned property. He's left it in a place which is not completely protected, but there's a certain social contract that we trust, like the stack of newspapers, like we talked about before. Ein dino kehefker va'asr lilo. That does not have the status of hefker, and it's usher for you to go ahead and take it. Or like we talked about the big box of loaves of bread in front of the makolet at 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, and that concludes the chapter. And the next chapters are things that I think I would like to get back to when we go further. We hopefully will finish the chapters shortly on Hashavas Aveda, and then we'll do chapters 3 and 4, which is what is a legitimate public announcement. We saw a little bit of that in Rav Moshe, who said that you don't have to invest money in making a public announcement, but you can just put it in the shuls and in the apartment buildings. You put up a sign on the bulletin board. And then chapter 4 is about what is considered a valid siman. What kind of siman does a person who claims that it's his have to provide? And so we'll get to that. We'll get to that later on. Comments or questions? Okay, let me bring up the next halacha, the Imrei Yaakov. Just give me 1 sec.
So there was one thing that was bothering me, Rabbi.
Yeah, go ahead.
The example that you gave before, where the father gives the child a coin and goes to the mokelet, and then the onus is on the vendor not to give him the goods. Wouldn't it also be the father's responsibility not to give valuable coin to a child to go and buy something like that? Is there no onus on the father?
Yes, and that's Well, that's the reason why there are some people who opine that the shopkeeper should not be giving anything to the child. In other words, yeah, don't give that anything to the child, because the child can't be trusted. So because the child can't be trusted, I'm basically participating in an abdication of my own property by giving him the goods. And so you want to, 1 second, so the shopkeeper is going to be responsible for, what did we say again? I mean, I think we had said in the,
for giving him the coin. You said you have to give him back the coin if the child loses the goods, but
right,
that sounds like it lets the father off the hook completely.
it does let
Father,
here, let's take a look at here it is. Let me just share, I'll share the screen with you again. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Okay, the case that is Hashaleach beno katan etzel hachen beni b'nasan biyado punjam. A guy sends his child to the shopkeeper with a coin, and the child gives the coin to the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper pours out oil into the container that the child comes with, and the shopkeeper gives the child change. And then the child loses the change and he loses the oil. So the shopkeeper is liable because the child, shalosh, and our argument is, shalosholcho elalahu dio, velo hayalo lishloach ela im ben das. He says he should only have sent the oil with a person of cognizance. So basically the attitude is, the shopkeeper is at least liable for I mean, he's forfeited the oil, but he's saying that the intent of the father was not to have the child surrender the coin and was not to collect the oil. So essentially he's accusing the shopkeeper of stealing the coin from his child. So what your question is that wasn't the father derelict in his responsibility, and he willfully gave up his coin because he gave it to a child to hold the coin? It's a good question. Is that, in other words, based on what we just learned, if I give something to a minor, to a child, then I've sort of abandoned that property. I guess the argument would be is that since there's a hand-to-hand exchange between the shopkeeper and the child, it's almost as if the shopkeeper took the coin from the child. And in that situation, even if I was derelict in my duty by giving something to a child, that doesn't give a person a right to take candy from a baby. It doesn't give me a right to take it from the hand of a child. If the child drops it or loses it, so then it's considered to be lost, and I'm allowed to pick it up and take it. But I'm not allowed to take it directly from the child, it seems, from this halacha that we quoted. I guess that would be the distinction. Otherwise, I think you're right. It seems like there's a bit of a contradiction. But if you recall, just to clarify, if you recall, we concluded that in that halacha, that nowadays, since the convention is to send children with small amounts of money to go to the corner grocer, the corner makolet, and to ask pick up a loaf of bread or a bag of milk, so then you are allowed to do it. Since that has become the social convention. Okay. So we're up to Yud Tet, and this is the case that we just saw now that we hadn't seen before, which is v'chein hamatzil me ha'ari u'me hadov u'min ha'nahar sheshotaf ve'avar. He says, if you're able to retrieve an object from a lion's den, or from a bear, or from a river that has washed up something that had that the river had overflowed and had swept away something, and now you're able to retrieve it. So afalpi shenisyashu haba'olim yesh lo lasos lifnim mishuras hadinu lahachzir. He says, even though technically this is called zuto shel yam, it's considered to be totally lost outside the purview of anybody, but it's proper for you to go above and beyond the letter of the law. And if you know that this belongs to someone and it has the siman, you should do the mitzvah of hashavas aveda. Afal pisha min hadin eino chayiv afim lo nisyashu. He says, even though technically you're not obligated, even if the owner says, I'm not miyayish, since it's an object that is considered irretrievable, at least during the time that it's no longer within anyone's purview. And how do we know this? Shenamar asher tovad mimenu umitzasa, because the pasuk says that it is lost from the owner and you find it. So what we learn from that pasuk is misha avuda mimenu umitsuya eitzel kol adam. That the language of the pasuk is deliberate. It says it's lost from the owner, which means that it's within the purview of other people. It's just not within the purview of the owner. So yatsa zu sha'avuda mimenu ve'ena mitzuya eitzel kol adam. So this case of zuto shel yam is not included in the pasuk, because it's not only outside the purview of the owner, it's outside the purview of every human being. Kaven shalohaya be'ef shalahatzil klal, since it was irretrievable. It wasn't something if once the bear takes my picnic basket, there's no way for me to get that back, and there's no way for anyone else really to get it back. Va'af im haya hu omed b'tzavach nase kitzavach al beso shenafal val spinoso shetava bayam. And even if he cries and he says, while the bear is taking his stuff, I'm going to get that bear and I'm going to get this stuff back, he says it's a meaningless statement. It's like a person who's crying out when he sees his house collapse or when he sees his ship sink. In other words, yes, it's a cry of pain. But if a guy says, as the ship is sinking, as the Titanic is sinking, he says, I'm going to rebuild this ship, right? Well, no, you're not. You're not going to rebuild it because it's going to be on the bottom of the North Sea, right? So you're not going to rebuild it. And you're not going to get your stuff back from the Titanic. And his words are considered to be halachically meaningless, because no human being can reasonably expect to be able to retrieve something when it gets lost in that fashion. So therefore, technically, it's lost. But if you do find it and there is a siman, you should go with the Mishuras Hadin. You should go above and beyond the letter of the law. Okay. We will continue this. Just to let you know that I'm not sure. Let's see. I think we're almost done with we're going to talk about the laws of how to make the public announcement, and how to take care of a lost object when it's in your possession. So we still have a few more halachas to deal with, but we've at least gone through the list of situations of where there is a mitzvah of hashavat zaveda, or where there's not a mitzvah of hashavat zaveda. Okay, so let's hold it here for today, and